The purpose of today's webinar is to provide an educational perspective on pneumatic compression therapy and its role, its place in competitive athletics, as well as to continue to educate and support what it is that makes Recovery Pump the best option for elite athletes. So by the end of this presentation, we hope to provide each attendee with some general information on how the human body works, and specifically how pneumatic compression therapy plays a role in athletic recovery, and then to equip you with the tools necessary to help convince those around you of the efficacy and advantages of Recovery Pump. So a little bit about Recovery Pump. We specialize in systems which are designed and manufactured for use in competitive athletics. Our products are used by athletes and physiotherapists, as well as physicians across the world, for these three general purposes: to control or reduce edema, which is swelling, to improve venous return, and to relieve muscle soreness and fatigue. Generally, when I begin a discussion on pneumatic compression therapy with prospective clients or those who are interested in learning more about how this technology plays a role in athletic recovery, I will discuss how the circulatory system works, and sort of in an abbreviated approach to that. It's important that everybody has an understanding of the body's circulatory system and has this in their mind as they begin to consider pneumatic compression therapy. So in this graphic on the left, the body's delivery system, the arterial system, is represented by the red arteries, and the return system represented by the blue veins. This is a closed system, and delivery of healthy oxygenated blood occurs as a result of the beating heart, and also muscular contractions within the arteries themselves aid in delivery of blood flow to the body. Conversely, return of deoxygenated blood is promoted through compression. We're going to get into that quite a bit, and how the body has a natural method of compression. Key takeaways here: the primary purpose of the circulatory system from the return perspective is to remove waste or deoxygenated blood through the veins, and from a delivery perspective is to deliver nutrient-rich blood. I say compression a lot of times. It's not entirely obvious that venous return is achieved through compression on the veins. This is done naturally without any influence of mechanical compression. The natural means of compression occurs through muscular contraction. So muscular contraction on the veins creates a pumping effect, which promotes venous flow. So the body is naturally designed to be upright and weight-bearing, and each step that you take and each time you contract muscles within your calves, there is compression occurring on both the plantar venous foot pump and also throughout the extremities themselves. This compression also exists when your body's at rest, just by breathing. These are more minor contractions, but through the diaphragm and the abdominals, muscle contractions create compression on veins. And because this system is closed, any compression on the veins will result in some level of venous return. It's important to understand that the venous system is not the body's only return system. In fact, The lymphatic system, which is a web-like cellular structure throughout the entire body, is responsible for 70% of fluid uptake in the body. So this is fluid that builds up in the interstitial space within the human body. And a couple takeaways here are that prolonged inactivity, stasis, for example, traveling in an airplane, laying around, limited activity ends up taxing the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system requires, just like the venous system, requires compression on and decompression in order to create uptake. And we know that that uptake is achieved through muscular contraction, but we know that it is also supplemented and improved through mechanical compression. Again, keep in mind here that 70% of the body's fluids end up being absorbed through the lymphatic system. And athletes particularly, if they are performing at high levels and then spending time during travel, need to emphasize means of compression and decompression in order to stimulate lymphatic uptake. So we'll talk a little bit about what happens in the human body as a result of increased stress on the musculoskeletal system. Cellular swelling occurs as a result of fluid buildup. There are microtraumas which occur in the muscle tissue. Increased heart rate and delivery of oxygenated blood leads to increased waste product. Not only deoxygenated blood in the venous system, but also buildup of lymphatic fluids. Those fluids end up creating pressure on the nerve endings, which results in soreness and muscle fatigue. This is the sensation that you experience, the painful sensation you experience as a result of fluids building up in the interstitial space. This soreness and muscle fatigue leads to decreased range of motion, limited training loads, among other things. This is the primary reason why such an emphasis has been placed on recovery, muscular recovery. It's an elite athlete's priority and physiotherapist's priority to help manage and relieve this muscle fatigue and soreness so that they're able to continue competing and increasing training loads. What we know is that stimulating venous return and improved lymphatic uptake assists in the evacuation of the fluid, which causes soreness, muscle fatigue, restricted range of motion. So we know what causes the fluid to accumulate, increased stress on the musculoskeletal system, and we know that improving venous return and lymphatic uptake helps evacuate this fluid. Again, I mentioned that recovery has become a key aspect, just as important as nutrition, your strength and conditioning program, even rest. It needs to be taken and is taken very seriously by elite athletes. It's why our product, and it's why pneumatic compression therapy in general, is of growing interest in the athletic community. I say pneumatic compression therapy in general because recovery pump is not the only form of pneumatic compression therapy available. In fact, with the growing interest, there seem to be numerous alternative means of mechanical compression popping up all over the globe. So recovery pump is not the only choice, but we know that it's the best choice. And our goal is to help inform our marketplace through consistent messaging and through reinforcement of what makes recovery pump better and the best. That's the purpose of this call today. So we summarize the recovery pump competitive advantages into four main points: clinical evidence, expertise, innovation, and smart technology. Now, each one of these, when looked at in a general sense, seem appealing, but really, if you are going to be effective at selling Recovery Pump, if you're going to be effective at convincing your marketplace, whoever it may be, that Recovery Pump is the best option, and even if it costs a little bit more than some other products, it's worth that extra money. If you're going to be effective, you really need to develop a comprehensive understanding of each one of these 4 points. So we're going to spend some time talking about these 4 points. And then, as Lawrence mentioned, at the end of the call, we'll open it up to discussion. We want to be able to receive and comment on your feedback, what you're seeing in your marketplace. But the competitive advantages that we identify here ring true throughout every market. So we'll start with clinical evidence. If you show this slide to any physiotherapist anywhere in the world, it will make them happy. These points here: improved circulation, edema reduction, DVT prevention, improved soft tissue and bone healing, improved lymphatic uptake, accelerate recovery, pain relief, and increased joint mobility. These are the effects that physiotherapists and physicians are looking to achieve worldwide. It's common among every athletic program, every physical therapy clinic, every sports performance, human performance center around the world. This is what we're looking to achieve. And Recovery Pump's very specific compression sequence and type of pneumatic compression therapy is what was researched when these points were proven. And at the end of this presentation, there's also going to be reference to each one of the research articles, the publications that support these claims. So any deviation from that type of compression therapy, really, honestly, companies that deviate cannot claim these things because the science was based upon the very specific compression therapy that we're going to talk about. So reason number 1 is clinical evidence. We are backed by science. Here's just a couple key takeaways. Using Recovery Pump is proven to boost lymphatic fluid movement, increase circulation, and aid with fracture healing and soft tissue repair. I think that one's very powerful. Boosting lymphatic fluid movement, increasing circulation, those are key for everyday muscle fatigue, to be used as a daily tool for maintenance for your athlete. Aiding with fracture healing and soft tissue repair, this is incredibly important as a tool for a physiotherapist to have at their exposure to use for athletes who have experienced some type of an injury. We know that it works not just based upon the research, but we've also analyzed what's occurring within the extremity during pneumatic compression therapy. So this image on the left that you see looping, this was a transparent garment. Looks just like your recovery boot, except it's clear. And it was placed over the extremity. So this is a limb inside the garment. You can actually see the zipper at the top of the image. And what you're seeing is the limb has been injected with a green dye into the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic fluids are identified here by that bright green, which is being picked up and shown here using a near infrared camera. So through each compression and decompression, what you see is lymphatic uptake. This is what we know based on the research, and now we have a visualization of it. How does that compare to how the lymphatics normally work? If you take a look at the image in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, this is that same limb prior to pneumatic compression therapy. And what I want to point out here is an accumulation of fluid in this limb in certain spots. You should be able to see my mouse here. I mentioned earlier that accumulation of lymphatic fluid taxes the system. So if you notice this area here, again, it's the same limb, you'll see an accumulation of fluid with very little, in fact, no movement whatsoever. There is very little movement here. When the limb is, when the lymphatic system is taxed with an accumulation of fluid, it becomes very inefficient. And you can see here that there's very little movement. So that fluid would be creating that pressure on the nerve endings, which results in the soreness, fatigue. Oftentimes athletes will favor the limb, compensate if they're feeling sore in a particular area, and that can expose them to greater risk of injury. So not only is it advantageous during treatment, but also what you'll see here is the same limb observed without the boot, but after pneumatic compression therapy. And you can see here that the lymphatic fluid has been distributed more evenly among the entire lymphatic system, and you get a proliferation of fluid movement in the limb. Now, as the lymphatics are able to absorb naturally with the distribution of fluid, less taxed. One analogy we like to use with lymphatic movement and controlling edema in the limb, so swelling, is that of a snowstorm. So oftentimes we receive the question, how soon after surgery, for example, can we begin using pneumatic compression therapy? We're going to get into why the recovery pump is really the only choice for post-operative cases. But something I want to mention here while we're on this slide is that edema control is like shoveling your driveway. So depending upon what part of the globe you're in, you may or may not be familiar with this. But where I'm from in northeastern United States, we get a fair amount of snow in the winter. And if a snowstorm hits and we allow the snow to accumulate on the driveway, the next morning or later that day when the snow has ended, when we go out there to shovel the driveway, it's a real pain in the ass, and it's a tough job. But if you do what my dad always made us do, which was get out there every 30 minutes and shovel the driveway, it's a lot easier. And so something to be considered when looking at pneumatic compression therapy, and something I want everyone on this call to keep in mind, is one, the ability to begin treatment on a limb as soon as possible post-operative, because that accumulation of fluid will just continue. And the longer you wait to control that edema, the more taxed the body will become, and the less efficient the entire process will become. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. The snowstorm analogy, to me, it makes a lot of sense. The sooner you begin controlling the edema, the less taxing it is. Something to keep in mind here as we're seeing lymphatic uptake here through this visual. So we just talked about the first competitive advantage, and that was, if you've forgotten already, clinical evidence. Not only do we have the research that supports it, we now have visual proof that mechanical compression, specifically recovery pump, increases lymphatic uptake. The second competitive advantage is expertise. You're going to see pneumatic compression therapy companies popping up and going away. And one thing they cannot claim is expertise. Recovery pump products have always been manufactured by the global leader of pneumatic compression therapy. Our partner, Mego AFEC, has over 40 years of clinical experience, and together with our medical company and Mego, we service over 20,000 patients and athletes across 36 countries every year. I'll just let that sink in, because that type of expertise, coupled with our innovation, allows us to provide products which are specifically engineered for our ever-changing marketplace, but remain within the scope of what is proven effective. And the quality of the product has persisted for decades. Reason number 3 is innovation. So as I just mentioned, we are innovators. We see other companies, even in our marketplace here in the US, attempting to emulate what we have done and what we have always done, really, in pneumatic compression therapy. They try to do it. They change their products to be more like ours, but they haven't successfully mimicked our therapy. We'll talk a little bit about that, but what we want to reinforce here is that we set the standard for advanced dynamic compression. We will talk about what it means to be a truly gradient compression device. We're the first company to offer that. We're the first company to offer a 3-chambered foot design and 8-chambered garments, which operate on our 4-chambered pump. We're the first to include a battery, which lasts for 8 hours of treatment unplugged. We're the first company to create the ultimate travel-friendly device. Just 2.2 pounds or 1 kilo. It's the lightest pump on the market. All of our pumps have precise pressure settings, allowing both the user and the clinician to set treatment pressures in increments of 5 millimeters of mercury, from 20 millimeters of mercury up to 100 millimeters of mercury. And we're the first to finish a cycle. Our cycle time is 2 times faster than our competitors. We will spend a bit of time here over the next couple slides really diving into that and why that's important. Before we get to the cycle time, I want to talk about our versatile garment selection. As you can see here, we have 4-chambered garments which treat the arms, the midsection. Our recovery core is comprehensive bilateral core compression. Our mini boots are perfect for travel, compressing through the plantar venous foot pump, the calves. As we talked about earlier, that's where the most robust effect occurs in terms of promoting venous return. Our boots are designed the same way. In fact, the miniature boots are just a smaller version of the full-length leg boots. There still are 4 chambers of compression in the mini boots, just like in the full-length boots. And now we offer versatile 8-chambered garments, the pants, which are one size fits all. Not only can the length of the pants be adjusted, but the interior diameter of the garment can be adjusted. What this ensures is a tailored fit. And the reason that's important is because if you're able to tailor the garment so that it fits snugly around the athlete, less time is required to inflate the garment, which means a more efficient cycle. I will talk a little bit more about the efficiency of the cycle here in just a second. I also want you to note the half jacket. This is also an 8-chambered garment. Again, these two garments are quite unique, and they operate on our 4-chambered pumps. So it's an efficient, cost-effective way to provide comprehensive compression on a 4-chambered pump. Again, we're still talking about innovation here. It's our third competitive advantage. Superior garment design is incredibly important. Depending on what competitor you're looking at, most of the products out there do not adhere to an overlapping garment design, which really does set Recoverypump apart. You get a good visual of what the overlapping garment design is by observing this graphic here. In fact, 30% of the chamber overlaps the more proximal chamber. So if anyone's not familiar with that terminology, distal meaning farther from the heart, proximal closer to the heart, our compression begins in the most distal chamber and then moves sequentially while maintaining compression in the distal chambers, one chamber at a time, until the entire boot is filled. And the entire boot becomes filled with a very consistent pressure. The first thing I would encourage anyone to do when faced with competitive products, particularly products that we see being manufactured in the Asian market, we have seen over and over again with companies like Air Relax, that the garment design itself is incredibly flawed. You can see this here on the image on the right. What's interesting is that the manufacturer is unaware of this flawed garment design. In fact, this graphic, if you look at some of these competitive devices, that graphic is actually used on their screen to demonstrate where the compression is. And if you put the boot on, you can feel this flawed design. So the first thing I would recommend anyone do when considering and wanting to compare and asking what's the difference is just wear the two garments and run it through compression. Pneumatic compression therapy is intended to increase circulation. Increasing circulation should not result in tingling in the feet. It should not result in any type of pain, any type of lightheaded feeling. Increased circulation, the promotion of blood flow, should result in comfort. And sometimes athletes get this wrong and they prefer a product that's squeezing tighter, or we've had athletes get out of competitive products and they think that if their foot hasn't fallen asleep, then it's not working properly. It's just because they don't have a thorough understanding of what is attempting to be achieved through pneumatic compression therapy and how the human body responds to increased circulation. So losing sensation in your foot is an indication of restriction of blood flow. You will also see this commonly when products allow compression at high levels, over 100 millimeters of mercury. In fact, there has been research conducted that shows that high levels of compression on the limb will result in a tourniquet effect. And pumps are being sold into the athletic market that allow for compression settings that's nearly triple what we know as safe and effective based on the research. It's why our products are all limited to 100 millimeters of mercury. Our recommendation is to treat anywhere from 40 to 70, but we do not have any reason to believe that 100 millimeters of mercury is going to constrict flow. And if the athlete or patient is experiencing tingling in the toes, the general recommendation is to reduce the pressure. So let's talk about the garment design a little bit more here. What do we achieve by engineering our garments in this way? One, maximum efficiency. If there's gaps in pressure, it can result in buildup of fluid in the space where there's less pressure. So if the garment is not, if the chambers are not overlapping, you'll have more pressure at the apex of the chamber than you have at the space where the chambers are joined by a seam. Less pressure in these gaps here. That creates fluid buildup in those areas. Again, I talked about comfort. When using pneumatic compression therapy, it should be comfortable. And this ultimately leads to more compliance. So if it's painful and they say, oh, I can only take 20 minutes of this, it's not like an ice bath. You shouldn't be getting in and ready to get out. We want our athletes to be using this regularly. And you can't overdo it. So I want to show you a thermographic image which demonstrates what happens when the consistency of compression, the integrity within the compression sequence is lost. This is thermographic imagery of the lower extremity after use of recovery pump. Notice the consistent temperature as compared to, this was actually the Air Relax product, but this would look like this in any device that doesn't have overlapping chambers and which has erratic compression settings, higher levels of compression in some areas, lower levels in others. It creates a very inconsistent temperature range within the limb. And what does that indicate? It indicates fluid movement, activity, efficiency of the cycle. So still maintaining innovation, and the third competitive advantage, we do provide two different system options. One, the RP Lite, which is intended for, to be a travel-ready device, can be used in the clinic as well, operates on the mains, allows the clinician or athlete to select pressures from 20 millimeters of mercury all the way to 100 millimeters of mercury, has a start-stop function, a timer, also allows you to control hold time at the top of the compression cycle. I'll show you what that is in a moment. It's got a built-in battery, treatment for 6 to 8 hours of treatment unplugged. Then we also have the RPX device, which is our more advanced unit. It's perfect for use in the clinic and great for rehabilitation, as there are customizable advanced treatment options, different modes that can be set up, stored to memory. You're able to isolate the compression sequence to just the foot and calf if you'd like. You're able to independently control pressures in each zone. You have a hold time adjustment and a pause time adjustment. The hold time is time at the top of the compression cycle, and the pause time is time between each compression cycle. And finally, our smart technology. This is just a graphic to show how our cycle works. If you've worn the recovery pump, you know exactly what this means. The entire boot fills with compression prior to any chamber releasing, and every chamber releases simultaneously. This creates the milking effect, which results in the most efficient evacuation of fluid. We have seen competitors who have departed from their typical sequence and have tried to adopt this type of sequence. Here's a great example. This is a comparison of the recovery pump product side by side with our main competitor in the US, which is Normatec. Normatec has been in sports for about 4 or 5 years longer than we have. But when we entered sports, we began converting our professional and collegiate sports programs rather rapidly because of the advantages. And since that time, Normatec has had to readjust their product, come out with a new product. Their product now has a flush, quote unquote, mode. And this example here, what we're going to show you here is actually a comparison of the pressures in each zone and the cycle time using the competitor's fastest possible treatment cycle. So we set their product, it's the Pulse, the new product. This will be helpful for anyone out there who has Normatec as a competitor. We set theirs to the flush mode, which is their fastest mode. It's not their peristaltic mode, which is what they have been promoting for nearly 10 years or more, actually. They've now added this sequential mode, this flush mode, to try to compete with us. And this is their lowest setting. So we set the Pulse here to pressure setting 1, which it's important to note that there is no specific or precise pressure setting with the Normatec product. Their entry-level model, anyway. You set it to pressure settings 1 through 7, I believe. And on their lowest setting, 1, the pressure in the most distal chamber, which is here, pressure builds to just under 60 millimeters of mercury. So this is, in fact, their lowest treatment option. And that is a significant flaw. The competitor does not have treatment options in the lower zones. This is why Recovery Pump is the only post-operative pump. You can't treat an athlete or a patient who has an incision a day after surgery at 60 millimeters of mercury. One, they won't be able to tolerate it, and 2, it could create issues with the incision itself. The Recovery Pump allows for compression at 20 millimeters of mercury. And we do every day, we have clinicians putting our products on patients post-operative, post-injury as well, day after, even if it's sensitive, just to low pressures, and you can get to that edema control right away. A couple other things to note from this graph. One is just the overall cycle time. So this is not the treatment time, this is the cycle time. What you're seeing here is 1 cycle. So notice that the Recovery Pump here is set to 70 millimeters of mercury. And so it's very precise. The measurement in chamber 1 goes to 70 millimeters of mercury. And chamber 1 is the most distal, so farthest from the heart. It's the foot when looking at the boot. It's the hand when looking at the arm. The pressure then reduces, not by much, but reduces in order to maintain a negative gradient. This is what the research supports. Why is that important? Because if you put more pressure in a proximal area, so closer to the heart, than you have distally, you create reverse pressure on the one-way valves of the venous system. So this is something we spoke about at the beginning of the presentation. Those valves which open with compression and then close with the decompression, if you have higher levels of compression proximally, you're creating back pressure on the valves. And over time, that could lead to deterioration of valves. What I found very interesting when we looked at these specific pressures was that the Normatec is actually increasing in pressure as it moves distal to proximal. And then you get a drop off in chamber 4 and another increase in chamber 5. Keep in mind here that the Normatec has 5 chambers versus the 4 on the Recovery Pump. This 5th dot is the hold time. So we spoke about how you can adjust the hold time on the RP Lite. You can turn the hold time off so that the pressure would reduce immediately. In fact, if you're looking for maximum efficiency, you want the shortest possible cycle, compression on and compression off. So you would remove the hold time. If there was no hold time here, our compression cycle would be even shorter. So at this setting, which is 70 millimeters of mercury in the lower extremity with a hold time, we have a 60-second compression cycle. I also want to draw your attention to the dramatic and rather rapid deflation. Not only is it a quick deflation, which helps with cycle time and efficiency, but it's also a complete deflation. It drops all the way to 5 millimeters of mercury. In fact, this is why we call it smart technology. Our pumps will not begin reinflating until the unit itself identifies and registers 5 millimeters of mercury. Fortunately, the unit is designed so that deflation happens very rapidly. It's why you hear the pump itself exhale. It's an audible experience. You will hear it exhale, and that's important. It's an advantage. That complete deflation mimics a sponging effect, which we'll show here in a minute. Notice the slow deflation of the Normatec. So here's just a complete graphic of the advantages here that we've pointed out. The Normatec lowest compression setting. And you could actually say that their lowest compression setting is 65, because even in this setting number 1 on the competitor's product, it's going to achieve 65 millimeters of mercury in the third chamber. RP's lowest pressure setting, 20. So we can operate in this entire range where the competitor cannot live or exist. Our adaptive pause, that's what we call that feature on the units, which will not begin reinflating until the pump senses 5 millimeters of mercury. And then here's just a closer look at the true negative gradient compression. This is what the research supports. And it makes a lot of sense. And it'll make a lot of sense to the physios and clinicians that you work with. Here's an analysis of the highest compression setting on both pumps. One thing I want to draw your attention to here is the cycle time. Again, we achieve the negative gradient. Competitor's product increases from foot to calf in pressure. Of course, at a higher compression setting, like 100 millimeters of mercury, it does take longer to achieve that compression setting in each chamber. So you'll notice our cycle is a little bit longer than at 70 millimeters of mercury. It's still a very rapid and robust deflation. And the competitor is almost triple in terms of the cycle time. Most of your athletes are going to treat, at least in our experience, you're going to want to treat at the higher compression settings. We do have a lot of athletes who prefer a lower setting, but in general, we see athletes as wanting a tighter squeeze. It feels better on a fatigued muscle. This is just a visualization of the sponging effect. So what you're going to see here is, notice in that video on the left, when the sponge is submerged in the water, a full release of the sponge results in maximum efficiency of fluid absorption, while in the image on the right, a partial release obviously results in inefficiencies. So this is just a visualization of what the sponging effect achieves and what the recovery pump can achieve by full and complete deflation in its cycle. Something else to consider here, which we will add, is the period of time. So right now, these compressions are occurring at the same rate. And as you've seen in the previous slides, the recovery pump performs a lot more of these compressions over the course of a given treatment time. And so there's really two factors which promote maximum efficiency, and one is a complete deflation for lymphatic uptake, and the second is number of compression sequences, compression cycles on and off within a given treatment time. Just a result And then in this example, the same number of compressions were used. One was a complete release, the other partial. I also want to show you over the course of a 20-minute treatment time, the recovery pump, and this is at the highest compression setting. On the recovery pump, that is. It's on compression setting 1. I need to reassess that actually, but this just gives you an idea visually of the number of cycles that the recovery pump is able to achieve over the course of a 20-minute cycle time. So 20 minutes would be out here on the far end. We're zooming in here on about the 15th minute and what recovery pump is achieving. By this point in the treatment, we will have had 15 full flushes, and the competitor will still be working on its 7th. This is efficiency, especially if the devices are going to be used in a shared setting. You want to be able to maximize the time within the boots, and a recovery pump does that best. So again, there are references here provided. And I know many of you already have access and have seen this. You may even be marketing a presentation very similar to this. We're going to be making a few adjustments to it before this version of it is distributed. But we will constantly be improving and building upon this message and then making the latest and greatest available to each of you. This slide is a clickable link to the research which was cited when we talked about clinical evidence as a competitive advantage.